The magnetic field surrounding Theta Prime shimmered like an invisible shield as Ambassador Cressa Vale's small transport vessel approached the massive council station. From the viewport of her craft, Vale studied the imposing structure, a 12-kilometer-long cylinder of gleaming alloys and reinforced transparasteel, bristling with sensor arrays and defense platforms. The station hung in the darkness at the very edge of contested space, a testament to the uneasy peace between a dozen interstellar powers. Vale smoothed her simple gray diplomatic uniform, devoid of any markings that might indicate rank or authority. The only emblem she wore was the small silver pin on her lapel, the universal symbol for unarmed diplomatic personnel. An antiquated concept, many had told her. Suicidal, others warned. But Vale had insisted, and after months of debate, Earth's Coalition Council had reluctantly agreed to her unorthodox approach. Ambassador Vale, the station's automated docking system announced through her vessel's comm system. Please prepare for final approach and security scan. Vale sat perfectly still as invisible beams swept through her transport, cataloging every molecule, searching for hidden weapons or technology that might pose a threat to Theta Prime. She smiled slightly when the scan completed, finding exactly what she had promised. Nothing. No weapons, no shielding technology, no defensive systems of any kind. Just a single human diplomat with a datapad and the clothes on her back. Scan complete, the automated voice announced, a hint of confusion in its synthetic tones. Proceed to Diplomatic Docking Bay 7. As Vale guided her transport toward the designated bay, she knew that news of her unusual arrival was already racing through the station. By the time she stepped onto Theta Prime, every security officer, counselor, and diplomat would know. The human ambassador had arrived completely unarmed, the first such gesture in the 50-year history of the council station. It was exactly the message she intended to send. Commander Rylus stood rigidly at the docking bay entrance, hands clasped behind his back, face an unreadable mask of professional courtesy. Behind him, Security Chief Damar made no attempt to hide her suspicion, her hand resting visibly on her sidearm as Vale's transport doors hissed open. Ambassador Vale, Rylus said, inclining his head in a minimal gesture of respect. Welcome to Theta Prime. I trust your journey was uneventful. Vale stepped forward, extending her hand in the human tradition. Commander Rylus, thank you for your welcome. The journey was quite peaceful, much like I hope our discussions will be. Rylus hesitated before accepting her handshake, his six-fingered hand engulfing hers completely. His skin was cool and dry, typical of his species' biology. Behind him, Damar shifted uncomfortably. Ambassador, Damar said, stepping forward. I must insist on a personal security scan before you proceed further into the station. Vale nodded, spreading her arms. Of course, Security Chief. I understand protocol. Damar approached with a handheld scanner, her movements precise and professional. The device hummed as it passed over Vale's body, confirming what the station's systems had already verified. The human carried no weapons, no hidden technology, nothing that could remotely be considered a threat. Damar frowned at the readout. You're not even wearing a personal shield. No, Vale confirmed. I am here as an open book. Chief Damar, transparency builds trust. Or invites assassination, Damar muttered, stepping back. Commander, the ambassador is cleared. The hesitation in her voice spoke volumes. Rylus gestured toward the station interior. Your quarters have been prepared in the diplomatic wing. Ambassador, the Council has scheduled your formal presentation for 1500 hours. That gives you approximately 3 hours to settle in and prepare. Actually, Vale said, checking the time on her datapad. "I'd like to request an immediate emergency session of the full council." Rylus blinked rapidly, his species equivalent of surprise. "Ambassador, that's highly irregular. The council members are engaged in their daily duties. Many would need to be recalled from various sections of the station." "I understand," Vale said, her voice calm but firm. "Nevertheless, I must insist. The matter cannot wait." Damar stepped closer to Rylus, lowering her voice. "Commander, this is unprecedented. An emergency session without prior notification? It could be a diversion for—" "For what?" "Chief Damar," Vale interrupted gently. "I've arrived alone and unarmed. What possible threat could I pose?" Damar's eyes narrowed. "With respect, Ambassador, that's precisely what concerns me. No diplomat in the station's history has ever arrived without protection. It defies logic." Vale smiled. "Sometimes the most logical move in a game of strategy is the one your opponent least expects." Rylus studied Vale for a long moment before tapping his communication device. "Council Coordinator, this is Commander Rylus. The human ambassador requests an emergency session immediately. Please notify all council members." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, I understand the irregularity. Nevertheless, invoke Protocol 7 and proceed." He turned back to Vale. "The council will convene in 30 minutes. Ambassador, in the meantime, perhaps you would like to refresh yourself after your journey." "Thank you, Commander, but I'd prefer to proceed directly to the council chamber. Time is of the essence." Rylus nodded, though his discomfort was evident. "As you wish. Chief Damar will escort you." Damar's posture stiffened. "Commander, given the unusual circumstances, I recommend tripling the security detail for the ambassador." "For my protection?" Vale asked innocently. "For everyone's," Damar replied bluntly. Rylus considered for a moment, then nodded. "Approved. Assemble the detail and escort Ambassador Vale to the council chamber." As they moved through the gleaming corridors of Theta Prime, Vale noted the increased activity around them. Security personnel appeared at every junction, their weapons visible but not drawn. Surveillance drones hovered at discreet distances. The message was clear: "We're watching you." Exactly 10 minutes after Vale had stepped aboard Theta Prime, every light in the corridor flickered simultaneously. The nearby security console emitted a series of rapid beeps before its display went dark. Damar immediately drew her weapon, positioning herself between Vale and the darkened section of the corridor. "Station security, report status," she barked into her communicator. The only response was static. Vale remained perfectly calm. "It appears you're experiencing some technical difficulties. Chief Damar." "What have you done?" Damar demanded, her weapon now pointed directly at Vale. "I've done nothing," Vale replied, raising her empty hands slowly. "But I suggest we proceed to the council chamber without delay. I believe this is precisely why my emergency session is necessary." Rylus's voice came through on Damar's communicator, breaking through the static. "Chief, all station sensors are experiencing intermittent failures. Engineering reports no explanation. Maintain escort of the ambassador, but heighten alert status to level 1. "Acknowledged," Damar replied, her eyes never leaving Vale. Moving to level 1 protocols. Within moments, the corridor filled with security personnel, their weapons drawn. Vale found herself at the center of a moving formation, surrounded by guards who watched her with naked suspicion. "This seems excessive," Vale observed mildly. "You arrive unarmed, demand an emergency session, and within minutes our systems begin failing." Damar replied, "Forgive me if I find the timing suspicious. Correlation is not causation." Chief Damar, Vale said, "But I understand your caution. Please, let's continue to the council chamber. I believe I can provide some clarity on the situation." By the time they reached the Grand Council chamber, nearly every member had arrived, their faces showing various degrees of concern and irritation. The vast circular room, designed to accommodate representatives from dozens of species, felt tense and charged with anticipation. Commander Rylus stood at the center of the chamber, beside the massive holographic display that currently showed a station-wide schematic with numerous sections flashing red. "Ambassador Vale," he acknowledged as she entered with her security escort. "The Council has assembled as requested. I must inform you that we are currently experiencing station-wide technical issues that may necessitate cutting this session short. Those technical issues are precisely why I requested this emergency session, Commander," Vale replied, stepping forward to address the gathered council members. "Distinguished representatives of the Interstellar Council, I thank you for convening on such short notice. I am Ambassador Cressa Vale of Earth." A tall, willowy counselor with luminescent skin rose from her seat. "Ambassador Vale, I am Counselor Thela of the Luminari Collective. While we welcome Earth's diplomatic initiative, I must question both your methods and your timing. You arrive unannounced, demand an immediate session, and coincidentally, our station begins experiencing unprecedented technical failures." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. "I understand your concerns, Counselor Thela," Vale replied, "and I assure you, the timing is not coincidental, but neither is it hostile." Before Vale could continue, the chamber's main doors slid open, and Dr. Navo, the station's chief engineer, hurried in. The Kalian's multifaceted eyes reflected the emergency lighting as he approached Rylus. "Commander, we've identified multiple intrusion attempts in the station's central processing core," Dr. Navo reported, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent chamber. "Someone is attempting to access our defense systems." All eyes turned to Vale. "As I was about to explain," she continued calmly, "Theta Prime has been compromised for some time, but not by me, and not by Earth." She walked to the central holographic display and extended her hand. "May I, Commander?" Rylus hesitated, then nodded to Dr. Navo. "Allow the ambassador access. Limited protocols only." Dr. Navo reluctantly entered a series of commands, and the display controls illuminated under Vale's fingers. With swift, practiced movements, Vale manipulated the holographic interface, bringing up a series of code sequences and system diagrams. "For the past 6 months," Vale explained as she worked, "Earth's Cyber Intelligence Division has detected consistent patterns of infiltration attempts against diplomatic outposts throughout the neutral zones. 3 weeks ago, we identified the source." The display shifted to show a complex network diagram leading back to Theta Prime. "Someone on this station has been systematically compromising security across multiple jurisdictions." Vale continued, "Not to attack, at least not yet, but to gather intelligence and plant dormant infiltration protocols." Damar stepped forward, her hand still on her weapon. "That's an outrageous accusation without evidence. Our security systems are impenetrable." Vale smiled sadly. "No system is impenetrable. Chief Damar, not even yours." As if on cue, the chamber's emergency lighting flickered, and the main power dimmed momentarily. Several counselors rose in alarm. "What you're experiencing now," Vale explained, "is not an attack. It's a defense mechanism I initiated the moment I came aboard. My presence triggered a cascade of countermeasures designed to identify and isolate the embedded protocols without alerting their creator. Rylas's expression darkened. You brought offensive cyber technology onto my station without declaration? That violates every diplomatic protocol established by this council. I brought nothing, Commander, Vale insisted. The countermeasures were already here, dormant within your systems. I merely provided the activation key through my diplomatic credentials. She turned back to the display, bringing up a new series of diagrams. The individual responsible for compromising your systems has been careful, patient, and exceptionally skilled. They've spent years building backdoors into critical infrastructure, positioning themselves to potentially control or disable this entire station with a single command. The council chamber erupted in angry voices and demands for explanation. Damar barked orders into her communicator, dispatching security teams throughout the station. Dr. Navo frantically worked at an adjacent console, trying to verify Vale's claims. Commander Rylas raised his hands for silence. Ambassador Vale, if what you're saying is true, then you've placed this entire station in jeopardy by triggering these dormant protocols. On the contrary, Commander, Vale replied, I've exposed them before they could be used. The flickering lights, the sensor malfunctions. Those are symptoms of my countermeasures isolating the infiltration pathways. Had I announced my intentions beforehand, the responsible party would have simply hidden their tracks more carefully. A stocky counselor with metallic skin pounded his fist on the table. This is precisely why no diplomat should arrive unarmed. You've made yourself a target, Ambassador Vale, and endangered us all in the process. Vale turned to face him directly. Counselor Drenthi, I arrived unarmed deliberately, to demonstrate that Earth seeks genuine cooperation, not confrontation. Had I arrived with the typical diplomatic security detail, weapons, and defensive technology, would you have believed anything I've just told you? Or would you have assumed it was an Earth plot to undermine the Council? Drenthi fell silent, his metallic features shifting in reluctant acknowledgement. The real question, Vale continued, addressing the entire Council, is who among you had the access, expertise, and motivation to compromise Theta Prime's systems so thoroughly? Before anyone could respond, a high-pitched whine filled the chamber. One of the maintenance panels near the ceiling burst open, and a small spherical drone dropped into the room, hovering momentarily before accelerating directly toward Vale. Security personnel raised their weapons, but in the crowded chamber, with counselors potentially in their line of fire, they hesitated to shoot. Vale didn't move. She simply raised her datapad and tapped a single command. The drone froze in mid-air, mere meters from her position, its weapons ports open but inactive. It hung there, suspended as if caught in an invisible net. And there, Vale said softly, is our answer. She tapped another sequence on her datapad, and the holographic display changed to show a trail of command protocols leading from the drone back to a specific communication node, one located in the private office of Counselor Zarn, representative of the Arcturian hegemony. All eyes turned to the tall, gaunt figure seated at the far end of the chamber. Counselor Zarn rose slowly, his expression unreadable. This proves nothing, he said, his voice eerily calm. The human could have programmed the drone herself as a theatrical demonstration. Vale shook her head. The drone's internal log shows it was activated 19 seconds ago from your private terminal. Counselor, the same terminal that has been issuing disguised commands to station systems for months. The same terminal that attempted to access weapons control the moment I revealed the infiltration. Zarn's hand moved swiftly to his wrist device, but before he could activate it, security personnel surrounded him, weapons drawn. Security override Omega-7-3, Damar commanded, and Zarn's wrist device emitted a soft tone before deactivating completely. Counselor Zarn, you are detained pending investigation into acts of sabotage and attempted assassination. As security led the counselor away, Vale turned back to the assembled council members. I arrived unarmed not out of naivety, but because I needed to demonstrate that Earth's commitment to peace is absolute. We could have simply reported the infiltration, but accusations without proof would have only deepened the mistrust between our peoples. She gestured to the disabled drone still hovering in the chamber. Instead, I placed myself at risk to expose the true threat to this council, not external enemies, but the cancer of suspicion and power-seeking from within. Commander Rylus stepped forward. Ambassador Vale, while your methods were unorthodox, it appears we owe you a debt of gratitude. However, many questions remain. How did Earth discover the infiltration? How did you implement countermeasures without bringing technology aboard? And most importantly, why risk your life when you could have simply sent this information through secure channels? Vale smiled. All fair questions, Commander. The infiltration was discovered because Earth has been developing defensive algorithms specifically designed to detect the kind of subtle, long-term compromise that Counselor Zarn implemented. As for the countermeasures, they were embedded in my diplomatic credentials. The electronic signature itself contained dormant code that activated when scanned by your systems. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each council member in turn. And I risked my life because some truths can only be demonstrated, not explained. Earth is committed to a new kind of diplomacy, one based on transparency, trust, and mutual vulnerability. I came unarmed to show that strength lies not in weapons or defenses, but in openness and cooperation. Counselor Thela rose again. A noble sentiment, Ambassador Vale, but one that nearly got you killed in your first hour on Theta Prime. On the contrary, Vale replied, it exposed a threat that might have remained hidden for years. Sometimes, vulnerability is the most powerful position one can adopt. The chamber fell silent as her words sank in. After a moment, Commander Rylus cleared his throat. Chief Damar, please secure the council chamber and begin a thorough sweep of all systems. Dr. Navo, work with the ambassador to remove any remaining infiltration protocols. I'm declaring a station-wide security alert until we can verify that all threats have been neutralized. He turned to Vale. Ambassador, your emergency session has certainly proven necessary. I suggest we reconvene in 3 hours, after we've had time to assess the full extent of Counselor Zarn's activities. Vale nodded. Thank you. Commander, I'm at your disposal. As the council members filed out, many casting curious or respectful glances toward Vale, Damar approached her. You took an unconscionable risk. Ambassador, the security chief said, her voice low. Had your timing been off by even seconds, that drone would have killed you. Vale met her gaze steadily. The risk was calculated. Chief Damar, I trusted in Earth's technology and in your abilities. My abilities? Damar asked, surprised. I observed your security protocols during my approach to Theta Prime. Vale explained. Your response times, your formation patterns, they're exceptional. I knew that even if my countermeasures failed, your team would react with sufficient speed to prevent catastrophe. Damar studied her for a long moment. You're either the bravest diplomat I've ever met, Ambassador Vale, or the most foolhardy. Vale smiled. Perhaps a bit of both. Chief Damar, sometimes that's what diplomacy requires. The 3 hours that followed were a whirlwind of activity throughout Theta Prime. Security teams conducted sweeps of every section, while engineering crews worked to purge Zarn's infiltration protocols from the station's systems. Vale worked alongside Dr. Navo in the central control room, guiding the removal process using Earth's specialized algorithms. "Fascinating approach," Dr. Navo commented as they worked. His multifaceted eyes shifted through various light spectrums as he analyzed the code sequences Vale had provided. "Instead of attacking the infiltration directly, your algorithms simply redirect it. Traditional security thinks in terms of walls and barriers," Vale explained. "But the most sophisticated infiltrations can climb any wall, given enough time. Our approach is to let them climb, but ensure they reach a destination of our choosing." Dr. Navo's mouth parts clicked in what Vale recognized as his species' version of appreciation. "Elegant. Though, I admit, I'm curious why Earth would develop such sophisticated defensive capabilities if your intention is truly peaceful cooperation." Vale's fingers paused above the holographic interface. "Dr. Navo, Earth's history is filled with conflicts that could have been avoided through better understanding. We developed these capabilities not to gain advantage, but to ensure that miscommunication or hidden agendas couldn't derail the path to peace." The engineer studied her for a moment before returning to his work. "A worthy goal, Ambassador, though I suspect not all on your world share such idealism." "No," Vale admitted, "which is precisely why those of us who do must work twice as hard to demonstrate its value." By the time the council reconvened, the immediate crisis had been contained. The station's systems were functioning normally again, with all identified infiltration pathways isolated and neutralized. Councillor Zarn remained in detention, facing serious charges of espionage and attempted assassination. Commander Rylus called the session to order, his voice grave. "Distinguished council members, the events of the past hours have been unprecedented in the history of Theta Prime. Thanks to Ambassador Vale's intervention, we have uncovered a plot that threatened the very foundation of our cooperative governance." He gestured to a display showing the extent of Zarn's infiltration. "The Arcturian representative had compromised nearly 30% of our critical systems, with particular focus on defense controls, communication networks, and life support. Had these systems been activated as weapons rather than intelligence-gathering tools, the casualties could have been catastrophic." Murmurs rippled through the chamber as councillors absorbed the implications. "Moreover," Rylus continued, "evidence recovered from Councillor Zarn's private terminals indicates that similar infiltration has been attempted at other diplomatic outposts throughout the neutral zones. Earth's detection of these activities appears to have been legitimate and accurate." All eyes turned to Vale, who sat quietly at the diplomatic station assigned to her. Councillor Thela rose. "In light of these revelations, I move that we formally acknowledge Ambassador Vale's service to this council and to the security of Theta Prime." "Seconded," came the immediate response from Councillor Drenthi, the same representative who had earlier criticized Vale's unarmed approach. The motion passed unanimously. Rylus turned to Vale. "Ambassador, the Council extends its gratitude for your actions today. Your unorthodox approach has proven its merit, though I must note that it also created considerable security concerns." Vale inclined her head in acknowledgement. "Thank you, Commander, and to all Council members, I accept your gratitude in the spirit of cooperation it represents. However, I would ask that you consider the broader implications of today's events." She rose and approached the central platform. The real threat to Theta Prime wasn't an external enemy, or even Councillor Zarn himself. It was the culture of suspicion and militarized diplomacy that allowed his actions to go undetected for so long. Vale gestured to the security personnel stationed around the chamber. "We surround ourselves with weapons and defenses, convinced they make us safer. But in doing so, We create environments where trust becomes impossible and transparency is seen as weakness rather than strength. She turned slowly, meeting the gaze of each council member. Earth proposes a radical alternative, a diplomatic protocol that emphasizes openness over armament, trust over suspicion. I arrived unarmed today not as a symbolic gesture, but as a practical demonstration that vulnerability, properly managed, can be more powerful than any weapon. The chamber remained silent as her words sank in. Finally, a counselor from one of the smaller coalition worlds stood. Fine words, Ambassador Vale, but words that nearly got you killed within your first hour on Theta Prime. How can you propose that we adopt such vulnerability when today's events demonstrate the very real threats we face? Because today's events also demonstrate that traditional security failed to detect those threats. Vale countered. Every weapon on this station, every security protocol, every defense system, none of them identified the cancer growing within your own council. It took a different approach, an unarmed diplomat willing to place herself at risk to expose what all your armaments could not. She walked to the center of the chamber, her voice strengthening. I'm not suggesting that Theta Prime dismantle its defenses or that council members arrive without protection. I'm proposing a new classification of diplomatic mission, one where representatives voluntarily forego traditional protections in exchange for enhanced transparency protocols. Vale activated the central display, showing a preliminary outline of her proposal. Under this protocol, unarmed diplomatic missions would receive immunity from preemptive security measures. In exchange, they would submit to enhanced monitoring and agree to complete transparency in all diplomatic functions. Commander Rylus studied the proposal with interest. An intriguing concept. Ambassador, but how would such missions defend themselves against legitimate threats? They wouldn't need to, Vale replied. The host station, or world, would guarantee their safety through existing security. The protocol simply prevents security concerns from being used as diplomatic weapons themselves. Chief Damar, who had been listening from her position near the chamber entrance, stepped forward. Commander, if I may. While initially skeptical, I believe the ambassador's approach has merit from a security perspective as well. Surprised murmurs rippled through the chamber. No one had expected the security chief to support such an unconventional proposal. Today's events demonstrated that our greatest vulnerabilities come not from insufficient force, but from insufficient trust. Damar continued. An unarmed diplomatic protocol would allow us to focus security resources more effectively, rather than wasting them on performative measures against allies who pose no threat. The debate continued for nearly 2 hours, with counselors raising objections, suggesting modifications, and gradually warming to the core concept. Through it all, Vale remained calm and focused, addressing concerns without defensiveness, acknowledging valid criticisms while gently steering the conversation toward practical solutions. Finally, Councillor Thela proposed a formal vote. I move that the Council adopt Ambassador Vale's unarmed diplomatic protocol on a trial basis, to be reviewed after 1 standard year. During this period, member worlds may opt in to the protocol for specific diplomatic missions at their discretion. The motion passed with a substantial majority. As the session concluded, Commander Rylus approached Vale. Ambassador, I must admit that when you first arrived unarmed and triggered a security crisis within your first hour on Theta Prime, I had serious doubts about Earth's judgment in selecting its representative. Vale smiled. A perfectly reasonable response. Commander, perhaps, Rylus acknowledged. But your actions since then have demonstrated a kind of courage that goes beyond mere physical bravery. It takes a particular strength to voluntarily embrace vulnerability as a path to greater security. Not my insight, Commander, Vale replied, Earth's history is filled with individuals who understood that paradox long before I did. I'm simply fortunate enough to represent a world that has finally begun to embrace that wisdom. Rylus extended his six-fingered hand. Theta Prime welcomes Earth's wisdom, Ambassador Vale, and its courage. As Vale shook his hand, she noticed Chief Damar approaching, her expression thoughtful. My security teams have completed their sweep of the station. Damar reported. All of Zarn's infiltration protocols have been isolated and removed. Dr. Navo confirms that systems are operating at normal parameters. Excellent work, Chief, Rylus acknowledged. Damar turned to Vale. Ambassador, I've submitted a formal recommendation to maintain elevated security throughout the diplomatic quarter, despite the adoption of the new protocol, not because we distrust your intentions, but because your actions today have likely made you a target for those who prefer the old ways. Vale nodded. I appreciate your concern, Chief Damar, though I would point out that I was already a target before I stepped foot on this station. True, Damar conceded. But now you're a target who has proven effective. That makes you considerably more dangerous to certain interests. All the more reason to continue demonstrating that unarmed diplomacy can succeed where force cannot. Vale replied, I accept your security precautions with gratitude, Chief Damar, provided they don't interfere with the transparency required by the new protocol. Damar's expression softened slightly, the closest thing to a smile Vale had seen from the security chief. We'll find the right balance. Ambassador. After all, that seems to be your specialty. As Vale departed the council chamber, she noted that the station's atmosphere had subtly changed. The security personnel still watched her, but their posture had shifted from suspicion to something closer to respect. The councilors nodded as they passed, some even offering words of appreciation or support for her proposal. She made her way to the diplomatic quarters assigned to her, finally taking a moment to reflect on the day's events. In a single hour, she had arrived unarmed, triggered a security crisis, exposed a traitor, survived an assassination attempt, and fundamentally altered the diplomatic protocols of the most significant interstellar governing body in known space. Not a bad first day, she thought with a small smile. Her datapad chimed with an incoming transmission, a secure channel from Earth. Vale activated the encryption and opened the communication. Ambassador Vale, came the voice of Coalition Director Terran. We've received preliminary reports of your arrival at Theta Prime. Has the unarmed approach proven viable? Vale considered the events of the past hours, the suspicion, the danger, the gradual shift toward trust. More than viable, Director, she replied. It's proven transformative. The Council has adopted the protocol on a trial basis, with strong initial support. Remarkable, Terran said, genuine surprise in his voice. Our analysts projected at least 3 months of negotiation before reaching that stage. How did you accelerate the timeline so dramatically? Vale thought of the disabled assassination drone, of Commander Rylus's gradual shift from suspicion to respect, of Chief Damar's unexpected support. Let's just say I found an opportunity to provide a practical demonstration of the protocol's effectiveness. She answered diplomatically. I look forward to your full report. Terran said, In the meantime, the Coalition Council extends its congratulations on this initial success. Thank you, Director. Though I should note that this is just the beginning. Changing protocols is relatively simple. Changing entrenched thinking will be the real challenge. A challenge you seem uniquely suited to address. Ambassador Vale. Terran replied, Earth has great confidence in your approach. After the communication ended, Vale stood at the viewport in her quarters, gazing out at the stars beyond Theta Prime, somewhere out there. Among those distant lights, other diplomatic stations faced the same challenges, suspicion masquerading as security, fear disguised as protocol, weapons presented as necessary evils. One station and one diplomatic protocol wouldn't change that reality overnight. But it was a beginning, a demonstration that vulnerability could be strength, that transparency could replace arms, that trust, once established, could provide security that no weapon ever could. Vale touched the silver pin on her lapel, the symbol of an unarmed diplomat. It had been seen as a liability, a weakness to be exploited. Now, perhaps, it would begin to be recognized as what she had always intended, not a target, but a promise, not an invitation to attack, but a hand extended in genuine peace. Outside her viewport, the stars continued their eternal dance, indifferent to the conflicts and cooperations of the civilizations that traveled between them. But for the first time in decades, the diplomatic station that orbited at the edge of contested space had taken a step away from the logic of arms and toward the wisdom of trust. Ambassador Cressa Vale, the unarmed diplomat who had triggered a security crisis in her first hour aboard Theta Prime, smiled at the stars. Sometimes, the greatest security came not from having the strongest shields, but from having no shields at all. And sometimes, the most revolutionary act was simply to arrive unarmed and trust that others would eventually recognize the strength in that choice. It had worked today. 1 hour, 1 station, 1 council. Tomorrow, perhaps, the stars,